Time to round up a big story from the week. Last week, 2 refugees, including one Houstonian, were arrested on terror charges. Omar Faraj Saeed Al-Hardan, 24 years old of Houston, is charged with attempting to provide material support to ISIS. He is a Palestinian born in Iraq and living as a refugee here. Another terror suspect arrested in California also appeared in court Friday. Authorities say he had promised to teach Al-Hardan how to use weapons and advised him on fighting assignments. This comes at a time when Americans worry that terrorists could enter the U.S. posing as refugees. That's our topic this half hour. We want to hear from you on our Fox 26 Facebook page. You can also weigh in on Twitter. Be sure to use the hashtag Fox26 for life. Joining us live in our newsroom is our panel led by our senior legal analyst Chris Tritico, our news analyst Mustafa Tamiz, and conservative activist and attorney Jared Woodfill. Good morning again, guys.
Good morning.
What is your take on these arrests? No act had been committed yet, but again, these people were found in our country, in our city here.
Right. Well, thankfully, no act was committed, and it's to the credit of the FBI and the other law enforcement agencies that worked in conjunction with the FBI that these 2 individuals were investigated, arrested, and stopped before anything happened, assuming that they end up being convicted at the end of the day. What this situation does is highlight something that Donald Trump said a few weeks ago, and that's we don't do a good enough job in vetting these refugees from this region of the world before they come into the United States. And it highlights what he said. They're going to come here and commit acts of violence. Mustafa, was Donald, you were critical of Donald Trump when he made his statements. Was he right?
Well, I think you're going to see, I read the indictments, so we have some little information about it from that. But I think what we're going to see as more information comes about the case is that these people actually radicalized when they were here. It wasn't that they came as part of any terrorist groups. After being here for several years, that's how they ended up radicalizing. And that's really the challenge. It's not necessarily the refugees, how do we keep people out, but how do we deal with this online radicalization that's occurring, this ISIS propaganda that is recruiting people from around the world to join in their fight. And I think, just reading in between the lines in the indictment, it was basically a conversation between these 2 individuals that started thinking about doing something. And so the FBI was very quick in seizing moment and catching them.
It's not helpful to the argument that they came here and then became radicalized, is it? I mean, it doesn't make us feel any safer.
No, absolutely not. And Donald Trump had it right. We have a real problem here. Our federal government has admitted we don't have the ability to properly screen people coming here. And so you could have 10 people come in and 9 good people, but that one person could take a whole lot of lives. And so it puts our families at risk, it puts our neighbors at risk, it puts our whole community at risk. So until we can get it right, until we can properly screen who's actually coming into this country, knowing that ISIS has made it very clear that they want to destroy and kill us, we need to be ever vigilant. We need to make sure we do everything we possibly can to protect our citizens, to protect our families. And I think Trump had it right, and I think we need to continue to put a pause on things until we can get it right and know who's coming in.
How does that help us calm the world situation down when the rhetoric coming out of our country is really as divisive as the rhetoric coming from them?
Well, I'm not concerned about what they're thinking about us. I'm concerned about protecting our wives, our daughters, and our families. And so I'm not going to fashion policy in a manner that says, oh, well, what are you going to think about me? And that's part of the problem right now. The policy we've created is all based on political correctness. Let's get away from political correctness and focus on national security, and then we can move forward.
And I think my good friend is wrong about that, because I think that's what causes part of the problem we're having, is our rhetoric is as bad and divisive as the rhetoric they're giving.
I think we look at this from a very political, partisan lens, right? What is Donald Trump saying? What is someone else saying? What do Americans believe from an opinion standpoint? We've got all this type of stuff. But if you look at from a security analyst standpoint, the rhetoric actually creates the pool from which people like Al-Qaeda or ISIS can recruit from. The more this kind of the culture of war, the more of this kind of war of civilization type of arguments get placed, the more there's an opportunity for them to recruit. And so although there's something good about saying, hey, I was right, look, we caught somebody, but is the country any safer? And I would argue that this type of rhetoric is actually going to make us less safe than more.
Let me go to Sally. She's monitoring our social media.
Okay, we want to head over to Twitter and say good morning to Ben, one of our loyal viewers. He says it's very hard to do a reliable background check on refugees from nomadic regions of the Middle East. Is there anything that can be done to make the process more reliable?
You know, that's really is and why it's right. It's really virtually impossible for us to do a full background check from a country that doesn't have any records. And so the idea that Donald Trump is floating is really a permanent ban on bringing people in, because we'll never be able to do a full background check like we could on somebody from this country.
Well, that's exactly right, and that's exactly why we need to have a pause. We need to stop letting folks in that could potentially cause death to our loved ones. And the reality is, we need to get strong in our rhetoric. We need to not back down and be afraid to call it what it is. These are radical Muslim jihadists, and they are terrorists, and we need to not run from that language. And that's the problem we have at the White House. We have a White House and administration that has backed down from the rhetoric, that has backed down from putting muscle behind our policies, and that puts our citizens at risk.
Doesn't your statement get back to what Mustafa was saying? Actually, these two individuals who are now arrested came here. They were not radical jihadists. They came here to escape violence, and they became violent when they were here. So how do you justify that?
Well, that's yet to be determined. That has not been determined yet. We know that these individuals came here under a resettlement program, but we don't know at this point in time. What we do know is that ISIS has made it very clear that they want to infiltrate our communities and kill people. Essentially what you're seeing happening over in Europe, what you're seeing happening all over around the world, they are trying to export to the United States. And we need to do everything we can to call it what it is, and everything we can to stop it from happening. Too much is at stake for us to do anything less.
How do you ever have a program to sufficiently vet these people, and I'm not being pejorative, but how do you ever have a program to vet these people that makes the country safe?
Well, I think that I think we focus a lot on the refugee problem and we forget about the radicalization problem, because there's the debate started, protecting the borders. It fit the narrative in which a political rhetoric can be wrapped around. The challenge is ISIS is recruiting very differently than anybody else I've read in the history of radicalization. They're doing it online. They're doing it by using messages that we are saying ourselves and saying that there is a war of civilizations. And that war of civilization gives them the ability to recruit. Because if you look at their messaging, it's no longer get in a plane and come here for training. It's kill where you are.
All right, so how do we change that? We're almost out of time, but how do we change that?
Well, part of changing that is like how we deal with sexual predators online, right? One, we attack the predator themselves, and we all saw that Dateline show where you capture somebody. But then the other side is you have to build capacity in those communities, where you have to go to those communities that are vulnerable and say, look, people are trying to recruit your kids into this narrative, and this is what you need to know, and this is what you need to do.
You get the last word.
I think we change it by destroying them, defeating them, and ultimately killing them.
So you want to send troops back into Iraq and Syria?
I think we do everything we can to take these people out. Either they're going to take us out or we're going to take them out. I want to be the first to act.
Even though the American people do not support ground troops back in Syria and Iraq?
The American people do not support ISIS terrorists coming into the United States and killing our families, our friends, and our loved ones. If we're going to stop that from happening, we better take them out first.